I am sharing this story not to shame anyone, but because silence almost erased me. I believed family meant safety. I believed love meant patience. I believed if I stayed quiet, things would stay peaceful. I was wrong. One calm sentence, spoken with a smile, pushed me out of my own home and showed me how easily kindness is mistaken for weakness. What happened after that changed everything I thought I knew about family, ownership, and self-respect. If you are watching this, please like the video, subscribe, and tell me where you are watching from, because this story is for every woman who stayed quiet too long. I believed my place in that house was safe because I had earned it with years of quiet effort. Every morning I woke before everyone else, cleaned the kitchen, made simple meals, and stayed out of the way. I paid bills without reminders. I watched the baby when asked and stepped back when I wasn't. I told myself this was what peace looked like. I believed love meant not being a problem. I believed if I made myself small enough, no one would feel threatened by my presence. I smiled through comments, ignored cold looks, and convinced myself that discomfort was normal in shared homes. I reminded myself that young families needed space and that my role was to support, not to question. I adjusted my life around theirs without complaint. I kept the television volume low. I walked softly at night. I skipped phone calls so the baby wouldn't wake. I stopped inviting friends over. I changed my routines to fit their schedules. I told myself this sacrifice was temporary and meaningful. I believed respect would grow naturally if I showed enough patience. I believed my son would notice. I believed he understood what I was giving up. I told myself that one day he would thank me, or at least protect me if things went too far. I lived with the idea that harmony required endurance. If something hurt, I swallowed it. If something felt unfair, I excused it. I repeated the same thought over and over. Keep the peace. I didn't argue when decisions were made without me. I didn't question why my name was slowly disappearing from conversations about the house. I didn't push back when my presence was treated like an inconvenience instead of a contribution. I told myself this was just a phase, that new parents were stressed, that I was strong enough to wait it out. I had raised my son to believe in calm voices and compromise. I thought those lessons would return to me when I needed them. I believed being reasonable would protect me. I believed being understanding would earn me respect. I believed family bonds were stronger than discomfort and stronger than power games. I truly believed no one would ever ask me to leave a home I helped build and maintain. The house itself felt familiar and steady, like an extension of my body. Every wall held years of effort. Every room carried quiet proof of my care. I felt useful there. I felt responsible. I felt rooted. I never imagined that someone could decide I no longer belonged with a polite smile and a calm tone. I never imagined peace would be used as a weapon. Looking back, I can see the warning signs clearly. The way conversations stopped when I entered the room. The way decisions were announced, not discussed. The way my help was expected, but my presence was not welcomed. At the time, I ignored all of it. I thought endurance was strength. I thought silence was wisdom. I thought love meant accepting whatever was given. That was my mistake. I didn't know that staying quiet was slowly erasing my place. I didn't know that my patience was being counted on. I didn't know that my kindness was being mistaken for permission. I truly believed peace meant everyone was safe. I didn't yet understand that real peace never asks one person to disappear so others can feel comfortable. It happened on an ordinary weekday afternoon, the kind of day where nothing feels important until everything changes. The house was quiet. The baby was sleeping. I was folding laundry in my room, moving slowly, carefully, like I always did. I remember thinking how calm everything felt, how maybe we had finally settled into a routine. Then I heard footsteps in the hallway and sensed a shift in the air. My daughter-in-law stood there with her arms folded, her face composed, almost gentle. My son was behind her, close enough to hear everything, far enough to avoid meeting my eyes. There was no shouting, no anger, no visible tension. That was what made it worse. The words came wrapped in politeness, delivered like a decision already approved. She spoke as if this was practical, reasonable, even kind. She talked about space, about routine, about how hard things had been lately. My son said nothing. He stared at the floor, at the wall, anywhere but at me. In that silence, I felt something crack. I realized in that moment that this conversation had already happened without me. They had discussed my place in that house and reached a conclusion. I was only being informed. The hallway felt narrower. The walls felt closer. I understood that I was no longer part of the family unit standing in front of me. I was a problem to be solved quietly, neatly, without witnesses. What hurt most was not the request itself, but how calmly it was delivered, as if my years in that home were a temporary stay, as if my presence was optional, as if I could be removed without consequence. My son's silence pressed heavier than any raised voice. It told me he agreed, or worse, that he didn't care enough to disagree. In that moment, I understood something very clearly. This was not about peace. It was about control. And I was standing in the exact place where my role in their lives quietly ended. She said it on an ordinary afternoon, not during a fight and not with anger, but with a calm smile that made the words cut deeper. The baby was asleep, the house was quiet, and the hallway felt narrow as she folded her arms like she had practiced this moment before. She spoke about peace, about quiet, about stress in the house, and how things needed to change. She never raised her voice. She never sounded cruel. That made it worse. She explained that the baby needed calm, that too many people created tension, and that it would be best if I moved out for a while. She framed it as care, as responsibility, as something reasonable adults do. I waited for my son to interrupt her, to correct her, to say this was not what he wanted. Instead, he stood behind her, staring at the floor, silent and still. That silence landed harder than any harsh word ever could. In that moment, I understood the decision had already been made long before I was told. This was not a conversation. It was a conclusion. I felt something cold settle in my chest, not anger yet, not even tears, but awareness, the kind that arrives when you finally see where you stand. I looked around at the walls, the floors, the rooms I had paid for and cared for, and I realized how easily a lifetime of effort could be reduced to an inconvenience. She kept talking, explaining how this would be temporary, how they would help me find another place, how I could still visit. Each sentence sounded polite and reasonable, but none of it felt true. My son nodded along quietly, offering no protection, no hesitation, no defense. He let her speak for both of them, and in doing so, he made his choice clear. That was when the heartbreak truly arrived. Not because I was being told to leave, but because my own child allowed it to happen without protest. I searched his face for guilt, for conflict, for love, and found only relief that he did not have to be the one delivering the message. I realized then that I had already been moved out in their minds. My bags just had not followed yet. I did not argue. I did not raise my voice. I did not remind them of sacrifices or history. I stood quietly, listening as plans were made about my life without me. Her smile grew slightly, mistaking my silence for acceptance. My son finally spoke, saying it would only be for a while, as if time could soften betrayal. I nodded, because there was nothing left to explain. Inside, something shifted. Not revenge yet, not anger, just clarity. Peace in their language meant my absence. And as I stood there, I understood this moment would change everything, just not in the way they believed. After she spoke and my son stayed silent, my mind drifted backward, not by choice, but because memory demanded space. I stood there listening to them plan my exit, and all I could see were the years that led to that moment. Years they no longer remembered, or maybe never truly understood. I thought about the beginning, when my son was young and frightened of the world, and how every decision I made was shaped around keeping him safe and steady. I remembered the first job I took after his father passed, not because I was ready, but because bills do not wait for grief. I remembered waking up before sunrise, packing lunches, washing uniforms by hand when the machine broke, and smiling anyway so he would not feel the weight I carried. I remembered saying no to myself again and again because saying yes to him felt like purpose. Those choices built the life he now lived comfortably inside. When he married, I did not hesitate to help. They were young, uncertain, and full of plans. I paid the down payment on the house when the bank would not approve them a loan. I signed papers carefully, quietly, trusting that family meant permanence. I told myself it did not matter whose name was spoken out loud, because love did not need labels. I moved in later to help with bills, cooking, and eventually the baby, believing my presence was support, not intrusion. I remembered the nights I stayed up rocking the baby so they could sleep, the mornings I cooked breakfast so they could leave on time, the checks I wrote without asking to be repaid. I remembered fixing things around the house, cleaning corners no one noticed, and stepping back whenever they wanted space. I taught myself to shrink so they could grow. I told myself this was what mothers do. I told myself endurance was love. Looking back, I saw how often I chose harmony over honesty. Every time something felt off, I swallowed it. Every time I felt dismissed, I excused it. I believed that if I stayed gentle, I would stay welcome. I did not realize that kindness without boundaries slowly teaches people that you will accept anything. My silence was never weakness, but it became permission. I remembered the paperwork clearly now. The day I signed, tired but careful, making sure my name stayed where it belonged. Not because I planned revenge, but because life had already taught me how quickly circumstances change. I trusted them, but I also trusted experience. That balance saved me, even when I did not know I would need saving. Standing there in that hallway, listening to her speak about peace, I understood how easily sacrifice is forgotten once comfort is secured. They lived in rooms built by my effort, rested on foundations I paid for, and yet spoke as if I were a guest who had overstayed. That realization did not make me angry right away. It made me clear. I saw my past not as something to regret, but as proof of who I was. I had given freely, loved deeply, and endured quietly. That truth mattered more than their version of events. Whatever happened next, I knew I would not beg, argue, or remind them of what I had done. The past had already done its work. And for the first time, I understood that remembering it was not about pain, but about power. After that conversation, the house changed in small but sharp ways. Nothing dramatic happened at first. There were no raised voices, no clear arguments. Instead, there was a slow tightening of space around me, like air being quietly pulled from a room. My daughter-in-law became overly polite, careful with her words, but firm in her actions. She spoke to me the way people speak to someone they have already decided does not belong. She began touching my things without asking. My shoes were moved closer to the door. My coat was placed on a different hook. Small boxes appeared near my bedroom, explained away as temporary storage. When I asked where certain items were, she smiled and said she was just helping me stay organized. Her tone suggested kindness, but her actions suggested preparation. She was not tidying, she was clearing. My routine was interrupted piece by piece. I was asked not to cook early in the morning because the baby needed quiet. I was asked not to use the living room in the evening because it was their time. I was told to keep my phone on silent, to close doors softly, to walk more carefully. Every request was framed as reasonable. Every request made me smaller. Peace, she said, required adjustment. An adjustment, it seemed, was only expected from me. What hurt most was how confidently she spoke on behalf of the household. She used words like, "We decided," and "We think this is best," while my son stood nearby, nodding but not speaking. He did not argue with her. He did not defend me. His silence gave her authority, and she used it well. She began telling neighbors that I was tired, that I needed rest, that I was confused by change. I heard these things secondhand, and each one landed like a quiet insult dressed as concern. She packed my belongings neatly, carefully, as if that made it kinder. She folded my clothes with precision, placed them into suitcases I had not touched in years, and spoke as if this was temporary. Just a break. Just until things settled. Just until peace returned. But there was nothing temporary in the way she avoided my eyes, or in the way she smiled when my son did not intervene. I noticed how she controlled the story before I even understood what was happening. She told relatives I wanted to leave. She told friends I needed space. She told my son I would be happier elsewhere. Each sentence pushed me further out while making her look considerate. It was careful, strategic, and rehearsed. This was not a sudden decision made for a baby. This was a plan that had been waiting for the right moment. As the days passed, I felt less like a family member and more like a problem being solved. I began eating alone. Conversation stopped when I entered rooms. The house still looked the same, but it no longer felt shared. It felt claimed. She moved through it with confidence, pointing, deciding, arranging. I moved through it cautiously, as if permission were required. What finally settled my suspicion was not one big act, but the pattern itself. She was not asking me to leave because of noise. She was pushing me out because she believed the house was already hers. Her confidence came from assumption, not truth. She spoke like an owner because she thought she was one, and that belief gave her boldness. Watching her manage my exit with such calm certainty showed me exactly who she thought I was. Not the woman who paid for the house, not the mother who made their life possible, just an obstacle, just someone in the way of her version of peace. By then, I stopped trying to correct her. I stopped explaining. I stopped defending myself. I listened. I observed. And quietly, I began to understand that she was moving too fast for someone who had actually checked the facts. I waited until the house was quiet before I spoke to my son. Not because I was afraid, but because I wanted no audience, no influence, no one else shaping his response. I asked him to sit with me at the kitchen table, the same table where he used to do his homework, where I once cut apples into small pieces so he would not choke, where I stayed up late waiting when he came home too slowly as a teenager. I needed him to remember that place, even if he no longer remembered me the same way. I asked him calmly if this was what he wanted. I did not accuse him. I did not raise my voice. I did not mention his wife. I only asked whether pushing me out of the house was something he truly believed was right. He looked tired, uncomfortable, and older than I remembered. He rubbed his face and avoided my eyes. That alone told me how long he had been carrying this decision without saying it out loud. He answered slowly, choosing words that sounded gentle but carried distance. He said they needed peace. He said the baby needed calm. He said it was temporary. He said things were complicated now. He said a lot without saying anything that mattered. Not once did he say my name. Not once did he say he wanted me there. Not once did he say he would stand up for me. I asked him if he remembered how the house came to be theirs to live in. I asked him if he remembered the nights I stayed awake worrying about money so he would never have to. I asked him if he remembered promising me that family would always come first. My voice did not shake. His did. He said times were different now. He said marriage changed things. He said he was trying to keep everyone happy. That was the moment I understood the truth. He was not choosing peace. He was choosing ease. He was choosing the option that required the least resistance, even if it meant sacrificing the person who had always absorbed discomfort for him. I could see the conflict on his face, but conflict without action means nothing. Love without protection is just a word. I told him I was not asking him to choose sides. I told him I was asking him to choose integrity. I told him I would have accepted honesty, even rejection, if it had come with respect. What I could not accept was being quietly erased from my own home while he watched. His eyes filled, but he still did not stop it. He still did not say the one sentence that mattered. He said it was just for now. He said things would settle. He said I should understand. I realized then that he expected me to carry this pain the same way I had carried everything else in his life, quietly, without complaint, without consequence. He believed my love meant endurance without limit. I felt something shift inside me, not anger, not hatred, but clarity. I told him I would leave if that was what he wanted. I told him I would not fight him. I told him I hoped he would one day understand what this moment cost. He reached for my hand, but I pulled it back gently. Not out of punishment, but because something sacred had already been broken. He looked relieved when I said I would go. That relief hurt more than any insult his wife had ever spoken. It told me everything I needed to know about where I stood in his priorities. I stood up, picked up my cup, and rinsed it in the sink like it was any other evening. Normal movements felt strange after such a quiet loss. Before I went to my room, I told him one last thing. I said peace built on silence does not last. I said choices made to avoid discomfort always return with interest. He nodded, but I could see he did not believe me. Not yet. As I closed my door, I understood that this conversation was not the end of something. It was the beginning. He thought he had settled the matter. He thought my agreement meant surrender. He did not realize I had just stopped protecting him from the consequences of forgetting who I was. That night, after the house went quiet and everyone went to sleep, I did not cry. I did not pace. I did not pray for things to magically change. I did something far more dangerous to people who underestimate women like me. I checked the facts, real facts, paper facts, the kind that do not care about smiles, babies, or who feels offended. I sat on the edge of the bed with a small lamp on and pulled out an old folder I had kept for years. It was thick, worn at the corners, and heavy in a way only truth can be. I had not opened it in a long time because I never believed I would need it. I trusted family. I trusted love. I trusted that silence would protect harmony. That belief ended the moment I was told to leave my own home for someone else's peace. Inside the folder were documents I remembered signing, but also documents I remembered refusing to sign. Deeds, ownership records, loan papers, insurance files, pages with dates, signatures, and stamps that could not be argued with. I read them slowly, line by line, even though my eyes were tired. I wanted no mistakes, no assumptions, no emotional shortcuts. That was when everything became clear. The house was not shared, it was not transferred, it was not gifted, it was never placed in anyone else's name. Every wall, every lock, every inch of land was legally mine. Always had been. I had allowed them to live there. I had confused kindness with surrender, but the law had not. I leaned back against the headboard and let that truth settle, not with joy, not with revenge, with calm. The kind of calm that comes when you realize you are not trapped, only paused. I understood then why my daughter-in-law had been so confident. She never checked. She assumed. She believed marriage gave her ownership. She believed motherhood gave her authority. She believed my age made me invisible. I checked one more thing: the utility accounts, the property tax records, the insurance policy, my name, my signature, my control, every place that mattered. Nothing had changed. Nothing had been taken. They had planned my exit based on confidence, not confirmation. For the first time since that afternoon, I smiled, not because I wanted to hurt anyone, but because I finally saw the whole board. They were playing a game they thought I had already lost. They did not realize I was the one who set the rules years ago. I did not confront anyone that night. I did not wake my son. I did not correct his wife. I let them sleep comfortably in a house they believed was theirs. There is power in letting people feel safe right before reality arrives. I closed the folder, placed it back where it belonged, and turned off the lamp. Lying in the dark, I felt something return to me that I had not felt in a long time. Control. Not control over people, but control over my own life, over my choices, over what I would allow next. I realized I had spent years making myself smaller so others could feel secure. That ended quietly, in a bedroom, with paperwork and a pen. They thought I had packed to leave because I was weak. They thought my silence meant defeat. What they never understood was this: silence is only surrender when the law is not on your side. And the law, that night, was sitting calmly in my drawer, waiting for me to remember who I was. The next morning, I did not rush. I moved slowly, deliberately, the way people do when they are no longer reacting but deciding. I made tea. I sat at the table. I waited until the house filled with ordinary noise again, until my son and his wife felt comfortable, certain that the day would unfold the way they expected. That comfort mattered. People reveal themselves most clearly when they believe they are in control. I asked them to sit down. My voice was calm, steady, almost gentle. There was no anger in it, no accusation, just certainty. My daughter-in-law smiled as she sat, the same confident smile she had worn the day before. My son looked tired, conflicted, still hiding behind the word peace as if it could shield him from consequences. I placed the folder on the table between us. I did not slide it dramatically. I did not open it right away. I let it sit there, thick and quiet, commanding attention without a single word. The room changed instantly. The air tightened. My daughter-in-law's eyes dropped to it, then back to my face. She was trying to understand why I was not begging, not explaining, not apologizing. I opened the folder slowly, one document at a time. I laid them out neatly, as if I were setting a table. The deed, the ownership record, the tax statements, pages with dates that went back years, pages with signatures that were not hers. I did not need to speak much. The paper did that for me. My son leaned forward first. His brow creased as he read. I saw recognition dawn on his face, followed by confusion, then fear. Not fear of losing a house, but fear of realizing how wrong he had been. He looked at his wife, then back at the papers, as if hoping something would rearrange itself if he stared long enough. My daughter-in-law reached for one page and stopped halfway, her hand hovering. Her smile faltered. She flipped through faster, her confidence leaking out with every line. She had never seen these documents before. She had never asked for them. She had assumed ownership the way people assume silence means agreement. I told them the truth plainly. The house was mine. It always had been. Nothing had been transferred. Nothing had been gifted. They had lived there because I allowed it, because I believed family meant trust, because I believed kindness would be respected. The law did not recognize belief. It recognized facts, and the facts were sitting right in front of them. My son finally spoke, his voice low, unsure. He tried to explain, tried to soften what had happened, tried to say things had gotten complicated, that stress and the baby had changed everything. I listened without interrupting. When he finished, I told him calmly that stress does not erase ownership, and silence does not cancel rights. My daughter-in-law's composure cracked fully then. She started talking quickly, shifting blame, reframing the situation as a misunderstanding. She said she never meant to force me out, that peace had been taken the wrong way, that everyone was emotional. But the words sounded hollow now, like excuses spoken too late. I told them what would happen next, not as a threat, as a statement. I would be staying. They would be leaving. Not immediately, not violently, but legally and clearly. There would be notice. There would be time. But there would be no negotiation. The house would return to being what it had always been. Mine. The silence that followed was heavier than any argument could have been. My son stared at the table. My daughter-in-law stared at nothing. In that moment, they finally understood that I had not been removed from their lives for peace. I had stepped back long enough for them to reveal how little they respected me. I closed the folder and gathered the papers. My hands did not shake. My voice did not waver. I stood up, feeling taller than I had in years. This was not revenge. It was correction. It was truth reclaiming its place. They had expected tears. They had expected compliance. They had expected an old woman to fade quietly into the background. What they received instead was reality, delivered calmly, on paper, with no room for argument. The shift was immediate, and it was unmistakable. The moment the truth settled in, everything they had been pretending collapsed. My daughter-in-law's posture changed first. Her shoulders stiffened, then dropped, like a person suddenly aware that the ground beneath them is no longer solid. The confidence she had worn so comfortably drained from her face, replaced by calculation. Not remorse. Calculation. She was already searching for a way out. My son stayed quiet longer. Too long. He stared at the table, at the grain of the wood, at anything except me. That silence told me more than words ever could. When he finally looked up, his eyes were wet, but his expression was confused, not apologetic. He was trying to understand how control had slipped from his hands so completely without him noticing. He had believed peace meant agreeing with whoever was loudest. Now he was seeing what that agreement had cost. My daughter-in-law spoke next. Her voice softened, as if tone alone could undo facts. She said there had been a misunderstanding. She said she never meant to hurt me. She said the stress of the baby, the lack of sleep, the pressure of life had made things come out wrong. She spoke quickly, piling explanation on top of explanation, hoping one of them would stick. But every sentence circled back to the same truth. She was not sorry for what she had done. She was scared of what she was losing. Then she tried something else. She shifted her body slightly toward my son, as if reminding him whose side he was supposed to be on. She talked about family, about unity, about how tearing things apart would damage everyone, especially the child. It was careful language, chosen to make me look unreasonable for standing my ground. I had heard that language before. It always appears when entitlement is challenged. My son finally spoke then. He tried to apologize, but the words were tangled. He said he never thought it would go this far. He said he believed things would settle on their own. He said he thought I would understand. I listened without interrupting. When he finished, I asked him one simple question. When did you ask me what I understood? He had no answer. That was when the real exposure happened. Not in anger, not in shouting, but in what followed. My daughter-in-law's patience snapped. Her softness vanished. She accused me of planning this all along, of wanting control, of using the house as leverage. She said I was cruel for doing this now, when they needed stability. The mask fell completely, and what remained was resentment that had been there all along, waiting for permission to surface. I did not raise my voice. I did not defend myself. I simply told her that control is taken by force, but boundaries are enforced by clarity. I had not taken anything from them. I had stopped allowing something that was never owed. There was a difference, and it mattered. The room felt smaller after that. Heavier. My son looked from his wife to me and back again, caught between loyalty and reality. For the first time, he was being asked to sit with the consequences of his silence. Not later, not someday, now. and that discomfort showed on him more clearly than any anger would have. I explained what would happen next, the timeline, the legal steps, the notices. I explained it the way one explains weather, calmly, factually, without emotion. My daughter-in-law stopped interrupting once she realized there was nothing left to argue. My son nodded slowly, like someone finally understanding a language he had ignored for years. What surprised me most was not their reaction. It was my own. I felt no satisfaction, no thrill, no revenge. I felt relief, a quiet, steady relief that came from finally being seen as real, not as background noise or a problem to manage. I had not won anything. I had simply stopped losing myself. When I stood up to leave the table, neither of them followed. They stayed seated, surrounded by the evidence of their assumptions. I walked away knowing something important had shifted permanently, not just in the house, but in how they would remember this moment. They had pushed until they found the line, and once crossed, they discovered it was not a suggestion. It was a boundary. The days that followed were quieter than I expected, not empty, not lonely, just calm in a way I had not felt in years. The house breathed again. The tension that had lived in the walls, in the pauses between words, in the careful way I used to move around, was gone. For the first time in a long while, I woke up without bracing myself for someone else's mood. They packed and left gradually. No scenes, no shouting, just boxes, suitcases, and the sound of doors closing. My son tried to speak a few times, standing in the hallway like a boy who had lost his way home. I listened, but I did not rescue him from the discomfort. Growth needs space, and so did I. I spent time reclaiming the house, not by changing furniture, but by changing how I existed in it. I cooked when I wanted. I rested without guilt. I sat in the living room without feeling like I was in the way. These were small things, but they were mine again. Ownership is not only about paper, it is about presence. I thought often about where things went wrong, not just with my daughter-in-law, but with myself. I had confused patience with virtue and silence with love. I believed that being easy to live with would make me harder to discard. Instead, it made me invisible. That realization hurt, but it also freed me. My relationship with my son changed. It did not end, but it became honest. He called less, spoke more carefully, listened more than he used to. There was remorse there, but also distance. I accepted both. Forgiveness does not require forgetting, and reconciliation does not require surrender. What stayed with me most was the lesson I wished I had learned earlier. Kindness without boundaries invites misuse. Peace that costs your dignity is not peace at all. And love that asks you to erase yourself is not love worth protecting. I did not raise my voice. I did not seek revenge. I did not need to. Standing firm was enough. Truth does not need volume. It needs clarity. Now, when people ask how I found the strength to do what I did, I tell them the truth. I didn't become strong in that moment. I simply stopped pretending I was weak. And that is the peace I keep now.